to that, but I actually want to read to you, if you will allow me, from the New Living Translation. Now, there are lots and lots of English translations. Some are more word-for-word translations from the Greek. They're more literal translations is what they're called. And the NIV is more literal translation. It's more word-for-word. They've had to change a few idioms, but it's more word-for-word. The New Living Translation is what's called a dynamic translation. It takes the words, but puts them into ways that's more like we would speak. So it's easier to read, and I find it easier for devotion. When I'm doing study, I will use an NIV. Actually, I'll probably go back to the Greek, but let's not go down that route. So I'll use an NIV, which is for study, which is when I want to really get into the word and see the intricacies of it. But when I want to come for devotion, when it's just a time of me spending time with God and just worshipping him and being in his presence, and it helps me to divide by my time, and it helps me to divide my Bible study between so NIV, when I'm in my NIV, it's for work. Do you know what I mean? It's work, it's essays, it's sermons, it's studies. When I'm in my New Living Translation, it's me and God, it's devotion, it's all about us. And that helps me to differentiate. So I love Psalm 130 in the New Living Translation, so I hope you will just humour me. You should be able to follow along in yours, but I'm going to read from the New Living. From the depths of despair, O Lord, I call for your help. Hear my cry, O Lord. Pay attention to my prayer. Lord, if you kept a record of our sins, who, O Lord, could ever survive? But you offer forgiveness, that we might learn to fear you. I'm counting on the Lord. Yes, I am counting on him. I've put my hope in his word. I long for the Lord more than centuries long for the dawn. Yes, more than centuries long for the dawn. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for with the Lord there is unfailing love. His redemption overflows. He himself will redeem Israel from every kind of sin. I'm really enjoying journeying through Lent together, taking time out to slow down from the hustle and bustle and deliberately spending time with God each day. Some people have said to me this week that you've struggled with the sheets, that working through them several times, doing them again and again and again seems pointless. Can I respectfully say that that's probably because we're in a culture that says that the destination is important rather than the journey that we travel on? It's like when you go on holiday, isn't it? When does your holiday start? Does your holiday start when you get to the hotel? Or does your holiday start when you get the first cold beer in your hand? Is the journey something that you have to endure to get to where you want to be? Or do you enjoy the journey? Many of us at each point, we want to measure how far forward we've travelled, how far we've left to travel until we arrive. We all do it. It starts off as children. Several times, we had to go to the hospital twice with Adrian this week and had to drive into Nottingham. The first time we had to go in rush hour traffic. I've never been so scared in all my entire life. And I had to keep fighting down the question, are we nearly there? Are we nearly there? Are we nearly there? How much further? Are we nearly there? Because the destination is important rather than the journey. We want to measure how far we've come. And we want to see how far until we arrive. The thing is, these sheets are not about, these sheets that you haven't got today because I haven't printed it off, but they're not about getting to a destination. They're not about learning this today so that we can learn that tomorrow, and by the end of the week, we can measure how far we've come and know more stuff than we did at the start of the week. Actually, these sheets are an exercise in stopping, in spending time with God for no other purpose than to speak to him and to hear him speak. The idea about using the sheets over and over and over and over is so that they become familiar, And so the truths that we read drip feed slowly from our heads to our hearts, so that we can discipline ourselves and learn to stop, to really take a pause in our lives and to say, this isn't about me and what I can get from it, but actually it's all about you, God, and about what I can give to you. It's an alien concept, isn't it, in our culture? It's the reason why it says on the front page of each sheet, fight the urge to measure your progress. Because this isn't about progress. It's about spending time with God for no other reason than being in his presence. And we started off our Hungry for God series a few weeks ago at our cafe church. We looked at Psalm 139 and we looked at intimacy with God, the God who made us. And there was a reason we started there. See, God made us, he created us, and he knows us. He knows what we're going to say even before a word is on our lips. And so in that very first week, we learned that we can come to God openly and honestly, knowing and understanding how much he loves us. You know, it takes all of the barriers away when we know that God knows us so intimately, so much better than we know ourselves, and he longs to spend time with us. All of the barriers are removed. And then we looked at finding rest in God, the idea of stopping, of resting, of being silent with God, not bringing lists and lists and lists of prayers or lists and lists of wants, not telling God how to do his job, just coming to him in the middle of all of the busyness and the chaos that is all around and finding refreshing rest. Last week we looked at the theme of longing for God, and I found that really challenging. Because you see, we're Christians, aren't we? We're Christians, we're all in a relationship with the Lord Jesus, we're all following and being led by the Holy Spirit. And yet within us there's this sense of longing, of yearning for something more. And it never, ever goes away. This yearning for something deeper never goes away. We do our best to ignore it. We disguise it. We even learn to stop hearing it. But it never goes away. And this week I found myself yearning for more of God, for a deeper relationship, for more intimacy. I was at the EMBA, East Midlands Baptist Association Day yesterday. That's a mouthful. And the passage that was preached was where Jesus says to his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And Peter says, "You know, you are the Christ, Son of the living God." And the sermon just focused on the fact that this wasn't revealed to Peter by flesh and blood, but it was a revelation of who Jesus is from the Father. And then the prayer time that followed was about us having a fresh revelation of Jesus, of seeing him again as if for the first time, of falling in love with Jesus all over again. And I was like, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Help me to see you with fresh eyes. Help me to fall deeper in love with you. I yearn for more of you. And so this week, that brings us then to this week's subject, and we're looking at waiting for God. Waiting for God. We don't find it easy to wait, do we? Or is that just me? How many times when we open our computers and it says Windows is configuring updates, or whatever it is that yours says. You know, and we groan because we have to wait for it to finish before we can get on with anything at all. Isn't that one of the most annoying, it's one of the main reasons I switched to Apple. Isn't that one of the most annoying things in the whole world, waiting for that percentage to creep up and up and up? You know, that sense of being held up, of being forced to wait when we just want to get on with something. Or the other really important thing, the other really frustrating thing. Your call is important to us. Is there any more frustrating sentence in the English language than your call is important to us? I'm going to have to change my memorable place I tried to ring a helpline the other week, student loans. They're trying to chase my son for money that he doesn't owe. It's an absolute nightmare. So I tried to phone student loans, and you get through to this automated machine, and it takes several attempts for them to understand your name and number, and then you have to have a significant place. And it said, what is the 5th letter of your significant place? I mean, you don't know all my codes and everything, so I'm safe here. My significant place, Brentwood, it's where we were living. So, B-R-E-N-T. T is my... Did you say B? No, I did not say B. But eventually, you get past the security checks, and then you sit on hold for ages. So by the time I got to speak to a poor human being at the other end of the line, I'm so frustrated, I'm ready to take their head clean off their shoulders. We're not good at waiting. But then some of us are waiting for things that are far more significant. We're waiting for hospital results, waiting for treatment, waiting for everything to fall into place so you can have an operation and get your life back. I was talking to a friend of mine the other week. She lives back in Lowestoft, and she was telling me she's at her wit's end. She's waiting for a universal credit claim to come through. They stopped her benefits because they said she missed an appointment. She did miss an appointment. You see, whichever department it is that sorts all of this stuff out sent her a letter for an appointment in Inverness. She phoned them up and said, I live in Lowestoft. Do you have any idea how far from Inverness that is? She said, I can't get to Inverness. We have a car. It's a battered old wreck. It won't get that far. She said, I can't even afford to get the train to Inverness. I can't get to Inverness. And so they stopped her benefits. And she's waiting for the appeal process to go through now, waiting with no money. And you get the feeling as you call the helpline for universal credit, or as you call the helpline for student loans, so they stop chasing your son for thousands of pounds he doesn't owe, and as you phone the hospital to try and get some information about how much longer will you have to wait before something happens and what's actually going to happen next, you start to get the feeling as you wait that you simply don't matter. You're not a person anymore. You're a case number. You're a statistic. It seems to me more and more we live in an age where we feel that we're not being treated like a human being. You're just a number. Wait your turn. And so it's with fear and trepidation that I come this morning to this idea of waiting on God. But there's a huge difference, you see. As we come to wait on God, there's something I really want to emphasise to you. And it's really important for us to realise that the one that we are waiting for is our Father in heaven, who really does love us. With all of us, most of us probably now are in a situation where we are waiting for something, for some bureaucracy or some hospital or something. The difference is when we come to wait on God, we are waiting on someone who knows us intimately, who loves us, and who has our best interests at heart. He wants the best for us, and that has to be our starting point. And I emphasise that because it sounds obvious, isn't it? But we really do need to know and understand that the God who asks us sometimes to wait is our Father who loves us and wants the best for us. Can I tell you one of the saddest stories I ever heard? It's from the time when Ceausescu fell in Romania. You've heard of him? He was a horrible, evil dictator, for those of you that don't know. But when Romania opened up to the rest of the world for the first time, they found lots of orphanages that were in a terrible state, with children that were simply not being cared for. Do you remember seeing it on the news years ago? Well, different groups of people from around the world went into Romania to try and help these orphanages and to try and do something for these kids. And one group that went there were friends of mine from a church in Brentwood. They were a team of Christian occupational therapists. And I was having a cup of tea with Jill, one of the ladies who went. And she said to me, do you know one of the weirdest things about the whole place? You walk around this orphanage, it's silent. the children don't cry. Because they've learned that there's no point in crying, because no one's going to come. There's no point in crying out, because no one's going to hear. No one's going to answer. No one's going to do anything. You see, when a baby cries, that baby might be annoyed, it might be a bit angry, but actually that baby in that crying is expressing confidence that someone is going to hear, that someone is going to respond, and someone is going to do something. You're going to feed them or change their nappy or wind them or do something. You cry out because you're confident that someone is going to hear and act. The Bible tells us that Jesus in his time on earth spoke to God with tears and loud cries. And so this morning when we talk about waiting for God, waiting in Bible speak is an impatient word. It's an active word. It's a doing word. It's a word of people who believe that God can and will do something different. And so we're crying out to him, believing that our cries can make a difference. So today when we're talking about waiting on God, in the translation I read, the New Living Translation in verse 5, it says, I'm counting on the Lord. And the NIV says, I'm waiting for the Lord. More than centuries wait for the dawn. And so we get the idea that this is an active waiting, not just sitting passively twiddling our thumbs. It's an active, it's an impatient waiting. And right from the beginning of the psalm starts off by saying, from the depths of despair, O Lord, I call for your help. Hear my cry, O Lord. So when we talk about waiting on the Lord, what I'm not asking you to do this week is to sit idly by and say, I can't do anything, I'm just waiting. I'm not asking you to be passive, and I'm certainly not asking you to be fatalistic. How many people, God will sort it out when he wants to, if he wants to. What I'm encouraging you to do this week is to seriously cry out to God. What I'm asking you to do is to express that frustration to God when God is doing things slower than you want him to. You see, this crying out to God and waiting on God will go hand in hand, because a people that hope in God will get impatient. And that sense of crying and waiting, I can remember when mine was sort of getting a little bit older, still in cot, at about a cot age. And they do that thing where they cry, and then they stop and listen. Oh, cry some more. Now is it? Yes, she's coming now. Yeah. So, that sense of crying out, and then waiting. And then crying out, and then waiting. That's what I want us to do this week. People that hope in God will get impatient. In fact, my question to you is, if you're not impatient, what are you hoping for? What do you have faith for? I want to see things happen in this community. I want to see things happen in this town. I want to see things happen in my own family. I want to see lives transformed. I want to see people saved. I want to see people experiencing the love of Jesus. And I'm impatient for it. I'm saying to God, come on, let's do this. I'm impatient for things in the church, my poor leadership team. I'm impatient for things in my family. How long, Lord, must I cry out to you about these things before you act? So you see, this isn't about sitting serenely and calmly. We're very good at sitting serenely and calmly before God. But realistically, who can look at the mess that is happening in our parliament right now and sit there serenely? Who can see our need for food banks in this country growing out of all proportion and sit there serenely? Who can see homeless people and people caught up in addictions to drink and drugs and sit there serenely? Who can see people in desperate pain waiting for treatment that seems to be taking an age and sit there serenely? We cry out in our impatience for God to act. The world is not how it should be, and so we cry out. And so the idea is that in our Hungry for God time this week, that we're actually coming to God and expressing the frustrations that we have, and to remind us that God is listening. The psalmist here is crying out to God from the depths of despair. He's praying from some really deep, dark, horrible place. And if we're honest, that's where some of us are right now. We put a brave face on it and we're all smiles when we come out of the house. But actually we're despairing. And our experiences of crying out to God from the depths. One of the verses in last week's psalm talked about deep calling to deep. And I was talking this over with my friend this week, and I said, I'm not entirely sure what that meant. You might have noticed I skirted around it delicately last week. And he said, maybe it's when we feel that we are so low, when we are in the depths of despair over a situation, that God calls us into a new deep place, that he's actually calling us into the depths of his love. When we are in the depths, we cry out to God and we shout for help, and we discover the deep, deep love of Jesus. Don't be fooled into thinking that this isn't worth doing this week. Don't let the enemy rob you of what God has to share with you this week. God hears us when we call out to him. As we work through the psalm, verse 4 says that God offers us forgiveness so that we might learn to fear him. One of the exercises that I'm going to ask us to do this week as we call out to God is actually to examine ourselves and to see if there's anything that we have done or are doing that is actually making things worse. Because there possibly will be, not always. Sometimes things just happened and they are no one's fault. Sometimes we do, if we hold our hands up, make things worse. So verse 4 says that God offers us forgiveness so that we might learn to fear him. Or as another translation puts it, that we might have reverence for him. One of the things that I hope we'll learn this week from learning to call out to God through being terribly un-British and actually letting go of our emotion and crying out to God, as we face up to our need of him, as we face up to the things that we've done wrong possibly, is that we will learn to fear God properly. Now, I know that for some of us this is something that's difficult to get our heads around, because we don't want a God that's frightening or scary. And maybe some of us grew up with these images of God who's someone who's angry and waiting to zap us with lightning bolts if we mess up. Can I just say to you now, quite categorically, that is nothing like the God of the Bible. Fear of the Lord means to reverence God. It means to hold him in his place of honour, to respect him. And it's worth getting our heads around that. Let me read to you a couple of verses from different psalms. If you've got your notepads, you might want to jot these down. Psalm 19, the fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. Psalm 25, those who fear the Lord, he will instruct them in the way that they should go. Psalm 25, the Lord confides in those who fear him. Psalm 31, how abundant are the good things for those who fear you. Psalm 33, the eyes of the Lord are on those who fear him, whose hope is on his unfailing love. Psalm 34, for the angel of the Lord is a guard, he surrounds and defends all who fear him. Fear the Lord, you his godly people, for those who fear him will have all they need. You see, I could go on and on and on just from the Psalms. Fear of the Lord is a good thing. Whenever I think of what it means to fear God, for some reason I think of school teachers. Can I say now, I'm frightened to look at Jenny, can I say now I find school teachers quite terrifying. I'm 47 years old and I still have a deep inbuilt fear of teachers. But there was one school teacher in particular that comes to mind. I remember when I was in primary school, I can tell this story safely, because I'm 47 now, and Miss Tro was old then. Now, I know she was old. I know when you're 7, everybody seems old, but she was old because she taught my mum. My mum said when she was in the last year of school, she had Miss Tro too. So Miss Tro was the last year of juniors teacher. Would that be now year 6? Year 6. And all the way through school, you had one wish. When I get to year 6, please don't let me be in Miss Tro's class. But every year a miracle happened. Children went into Miss Tro's class, and guess what? They loved it. More than that, if you were a child who got bullied, you wanted to be in Miss Tro's class because bullying did not happen in that classroom. And so you entered Miss Tro's class at the start of the year with fear and trembling and a hanky in your sleeve. Woe betide you if you didn't have a clean hanky in your sleeve. But you entered with fear and trembling. And as the year went on, you found out that Miss Tro knew exactly what to do with any shape or size of cut or injury. She could tell a story better than anyone else you ever heard. She knew just the right word to say to make you believe that you really could do that hard sum that had been defeating you. And you found out that she had a sense of humour that was brilliant. Can I tentatively suggest that God is a bit like Miss Tro? He is scary and frightening, but when you get to know him, he is the best person that you can get to know. And learning how to get close to him is the best thing that you can ever do. So this week, cry out to God from the depths. Bring the things that are all wrong and mixed up and muddled up to God. Bring the places where you are vulnerable to him. And cry out to him. Cry out to him. It's really not like being on one of those call centre calls. Your call is important to us. Your call really is important to God. And he hears and he acts. Verse 6 says, I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. Things might be dark right now, but the dawn is coming. Light is on its way. So cry out to God and wait for God, knowing that he loves you and he hears you and he will act for you. So this week again, I encourage us to pray honest prayers. Don't be afraid to tell God how you are really feeling. See, verse 7 says, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. So we can wait and trust and hope in the Lord, because his love for us, his love for you, is unfailing. And just as a baby cries out, fully expecting his mum or dad to do something, we cry out to God, fully expecting that in his unfailing love, he will answer. I'm going to sing now my favourite